Welcome. Right now, you're watching this video on a smartphone, a laptop, or maybe a big screen TV. Perhaps you drove home in an electric or hybrid car. And outside your window, a wind turbine might be spinning, generating clean energy. What do all these things have in common? Your smartphone, my computer, a state-of-the-art fighter jet, and a giant wind turbine. The answer is a handful of grayish, unremarkable-looking metal. Or rather, a whole family of metals called rare earths. It doesn't sound very impressive, does it? But without them, our entire modern civilization would simply grind to a halt. Inside your phone, tiny magnets made of neodymium make the speakers and the vibration motor work. In a computer's hard drive, they help read information. In electric motors, they create the powerful magnetic field that turns the wheels. In lasers, optics, medical equipment, in missile guidance systems, they are everywhere. They are the vitamins of technological progress. Without them, we'd have a deficiency, a decline, a digital stone age. And now for the main question. Imagine that almost all the vitamins in the world are produced in a single pharmacy. And that pharmacy is China. Today, China controls 60 to 80% of the world's mining of these metals, and more importantly, about 90% of their processing. This means that even if you mine the ore in Australia or the US, you will most likely send it to China for refining. It's an absolute total monopoly. So now, knowing all this, let's ask ourselves the question that sends shivers down the spines of politicians and corporate leaders worldwide. What if one day China just turns off the tap? Not imposes tariffs, not reduces quotas, but simply hits the stop button and bans the export of all rare earth metals. What happens then? This isn't just an economic question. It's a tech apocalypse scenario that we are about to break down in minute detail. So, let's imagine. It's Monday morning. Global news agencies explode with the headline, Beijing announces a complete and indefinite ban on the export of rare earth metals and their compounds. What happens in the very first hours? The first thing to fall will be the stock market, the shares of tech giants. Apple, Samsung, Tesla, Intel will go into a nosedive so steep it would make the Great Depression look like a minor correction. Investors will understand. This isn't a temporary difficulty. This is a complete production shutdown. Let's take a specific example, a smartphone factory. It doesn't matter where it is, in Vietnam, India, or even the United States. The assembly line is moving. Workers are assembling casings, inserting circuit boards, and attaching screens. But then, a tiny component fails to arrive at the warehouse, a batch of microscopic magnets for the speakers, or the phosphors for the screen that produce vibrant colors. That's it. The assembly line stops. Thousands of people are sent home. The factory, a multi-billion-dollar investment, turns into a useless hangar. And that's just one factory. Now, multiply that by tens of thousands of businesses around the world. The plants of General Motors and Volkswagen producing electric cars will stop because they've run out of neodymium and dysprosium for their motors. Siemens Energy won't be able to produce turbines for wind farms. Hospitals won't be able to get new MRI machines which use giant superconducting magnets. Defense contractors like Lockheed Martin will freeze the production of F-35 fighter jets because samarium is needed for guidance systems and yttrium for engine coatings. Panic will erupt in the consumer market. Prices for all existing electronics will skyrocket. Your old smartphone that you were planning to replace will suddenly become a valuable asset. People will buy up the last laptops and TVs from store shelves. The used electronics market will boom, and entire workshops will spring up to desolder old components from broken devices to repair others. It'll be like Cuba in the 1950s, where old American cars are still running thanks to the ingenuity of mechanics. Only instead of cars, we'll have iPhones. Governments will introduce emergency measures. They might even ban the export of old electronics to preserve this technological scrap within the country as a strategic resource. A real hunt will begin for old landfills where computers and phones have been buried for decades. What was garbage yesterday will become a national treasure today. Within a few months, the global economy will plunge into chaos. Millions will lose their jobs. Green transition projects will be shelved. We will find ourselves in a strange world where the most advanced technologies coexist with their complete scarcity. We will have the blueprints and software to create amazing things, but not the physical ability to produce them. It's like having the recipe for the most delicious cake in the world, but no flour or sugar. This is the first, most terrifying and devastating blow. Not just a slowdown, but a complete stop of the planet's technological heart. Everything we took for granted, a new phone every year, the switch to electric cars, the growth of clean energy, all of it will become an unattainable dream. The world will be split in two. China, which can still produce all of this for itself, and the rest of the world, which will be thrown back decades in its technological development. We've just seen how production would collapse and progress would come to a standstill. But is the whole world just going to sit back and watch its gadgets turn into museum pieces? Of course not. A frantic, desperate race is about to begin. A race where the stakes aren't just profits, but the very future of technological independence. We're about to get into how the world would fight back, and the solutions are genuinely mind-blowing. If you find this kind of what-if scenario fascinating, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel, and you won't want to miss where the story goes. Okay, so the world is in a stupor. Factories are idle, stores are empty. What's the plan? The first thing every government will think of is to find its own vitamins, to start mining rare earths at home. And here, we're met with a cold dose of reality. Rare earth metals, despite their name, aren't actually all that rare. They are scattered throughout the Earth's crust. The problem is different. Their concentration in the ore is very low, and mining them is incredibly dirty and difficult. Let's look at a specific example. The Mountain Pass mine in California. It was once the world's leading supplier of rare earth metals. But in the 80s and 90s, China entered the market with its cheap labor and, more importantly, a complete disregard for the environment. Processing the ore involves hellish chemistry using acids and radioactive waste. China was willing to dump this waste in its own backyard, while Western countries were not. As a result, Mountain Pass went bankrupt and closed. There have been several attempts to restart it, but it has never been able to compete with China. And so, after our hypothetical ban, hundreds of billions of dollars will be poured into this mine and dozens of other similar projects around the world in Australia, Canada, Greenland. But this won't solve the problem instantly. It takes years to reopen an old mine or build a new one. Geological surveys, obtaining environmental permits, which would, of course, be fast-tracked in a panic, dealing a blow to nature, building infrastructure, roads, and processing plants. Even on the most accelerated schedule, this would take 5 to 10 years. And for all those years, the world would be on starvation rations. But there is another source, one that is right under our noses, or rather, in our desk drawers. It's called urban mining, extracting valuable metals from old electronics. Every year, we throw away millions of tons of smartphones, computers, and appliances. They contain, in microscopic doses, the very same neodymium, terbium, and yttrium. A global program for collecting and recycling e-waste would begin. Imagine giant factories, similar to incinerators, where tons of old circuit boards are brought in. Robots and humans disassemble them. The boards are ground into a powder, which is then treated with chemicals to pull out the precious specks of metal. Today, this is very expensive and not always profitable, but in a world without supplies from China, it would become a gold mine. The companies that develop the most efficient recycling technologies will become the new tech giants. We will learn to look at an old phone not as trash, but as a small ingot of future resources. And finally, The third and most important battlefront: science. In laboratories around the world, governments will announce contests with multi-billion-dollar prizes. The number one task: create a substitute. Find a way to make a powerful magnet without neodymium. Develop a bright LED without europium. Create a laser without erbium. This will spur fundamental science in a way that not even the arms race did. Scientists will experiment with new alloys, with nanomaterials, with organic electronics. Perhaps after 10-15 years of desperate searching, we will find solutions. A new generation of electric motors might appear that use no rare earth metals at all. Or we might learn to synthesize them using biotechnology. Human ingenuity, when pushed into a corner, is capable of miracles. So the conclusion of this block is simple. The world will not give up. It will respond to blackmail with a total mobilization of all its resources. An era of expensive, dirty, but homegrown mining will begin. We will turn our landfills into the mines of the future, and the best minds of humanity will work to rid us of this dependency forever. But it's important to understand that all of this takes time. 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. And all this time, the world will live in a state of a technological diet, constantly looking back at the day it was deprived of its most vital ingredient. But while the world frantically searches for a way out, let's ask ourselves, what about China itself? What will be happening inside the country that took such a radical step? By pushing that button, it will trigger irreversible processes not only in the world, but at home as well. So the world is frantically searching for a substitute. Mines are being built, landfills are being processed, and scientists are working sleepless nights. But we've forgotten about the main character in this drama, China itself. What is its goal, and what price will it pay for such a move? Because an act like this isn't just shooting yourself in the foot, it's shooting yourself in the very heart of your own economic model. Let's figure out why they might do it, and what would happen to them afterward. First, the motivation. Why would China take such a seemingly suicidal step? There can be only one reason. It has decided to go all in. This isn't just a trade war, it's a declaration of total economic war. Perhaps it's a response to a military conflict, for example, over Taiwan, or a preemptive strike to crash Western economies and try to take the place of the world's hegemon. The goal is not just to inflict damage, but to bring the rest of the world to its knees, to force it to accept China's terms. In the first few months and even years, China would experience an unprecedented boom. All of its tech companies, Huawei, Xiaomi, BYD, and hundreds of others would gain a colossal absolute advantage. They would have unlimited access to cheap rare earth metals, while their competitors in the US, Europe, Korea, and Japan would be idle. China alone would be able to produce the most advanced smartphones, electric cars, drones, and medical equipment. Imagine a world where a new iPhone or a Tesla becomes a luxury item available only to a few, while Chinese alternatives flood the market. Chinese companies would buy up the assets of bankrupted Western firms for pennies on the dollar. Beijing would be able to dictate its technological standards to the whole world. For a short time, the dream of Chinese domination would become a reality. It would be the peak of its power. But this triumph would come at a terrible price. And this is where we come to the main paradox. China is not only the world's mine, but also the world's factory. A huge part of its economy is tied to assembling final products for those very same Western companies. The Foxconn factory that assembles iPhones is in China. If Apple can't get magnets and displays, it won't place an order with Foxconn. The assembly line will stop not only in California, but also in Shenzhen. The ban on exporting raw materials will boomerang and hit its own manufacturing industry. Tens of millions of Chinese workers employed in assembly plants for foreign brands will find themselves out of a job. This will cause enormous social tension within the country. The Chinese economic miracle, built on globalization and exports, will begin to crumble because of its own decision. And that's not all. By taking such a step, China would permanently lose its biggest trump card. As we've already discussed, the rest of the world would throw all its resources into creating alternative supply chains. In 10-15 years, new mines in America and Australia will appear, recycling plants in Europe will be operational, and scientists may invent new materials, and as soon as that happens, China's monopoly will be over forever. The world, having been burned once by such a dependency, will never allow it to happen again. China will lose its status as an indispensable supplier. Its rare earth metals will become just another commodity on the market, competing with others. The country will lose its main lever of geopolitical pressure. In essence, by using this nuclear option once, it will provoke the rest of the world into creating a reliable missile defense system, after which its weapon will become useless. The takeaway for this block is this: a ban on rare earth exports is, for China, like playing with fire in a powder keg. It's a desperate attempt to achieve world domination through a technological knockout. In the short term, it could have a stunning effect, turning China into the sole technological superpower. But in the long term, it will lead to the collapse of its own export economy and the guaranteed loss of its monopoly. It's a classic example of a strategy where a tactical victory turns into a devastating, strategic defeat. So, what's the bottom line? Let's put all the pieces of our puzzle together. A hypothetical Chinese ban on rare earth metal exports isn't just a trade dispute. It's a global crisis scenario that unfolds in 3 acts. Act 1 is shock and paralysis. The world's high-tech industry grinds to a halt, stock markets crash, and millions lose their jobs. Our familiar world, where a new gadget comes out every year and an electric car charger is being built around the corner, ceases to exist. We enter an era of technological recession. Act 2 is global mobilization. The world frantically begins to search for alternatives. Governments pour billions into reopening old mines, ignoring the environmental cost. Our landfills become the mines of the 21st century. And the best minds of humanity enter a scientific race to develop substitute materials. This is a long and painful process that will take at least a decade. And Act 3 is the drama of China itself. The attempt to use its main trump card to achieve world domination backfires. A short-term triumph is followed by the long-term collapse of its own export model and the final loss of its unique monopoly. By winning the battle, it loses the war. So how realistic is such a scenario? In its most extreme form, a complete and indefinite ban is likely improbable, precisely because it is disastrous for China as well. It's a doomsday weapon that hits everyone without distinction. However, the mere possibility of such a move, even in a limited form, is already changing the world. We already saw in 2010 how China briefly restricted supplies to Japan over a territorial dispute. That incident was a cold shower for everyone. Today, we see the U.S., the European Union, Australia, and other countries already investing huge sums in developing their own supply chains. They have realized that 100% dependence on a single country for such a critical issue is a strategic vulnerability. So the process we've described is already underway, albeit at a slower pace. It's happening not because a ban has been imposed, but because the threat of it exists. This story is not just about gray metals and complex technologies. It's about the fragility of our globalized world. We are used to everything being available, to being able to order any part from anywhere on the planet and receive it within a week. But this system, it turns out, is held together by a few thin threads. And if one of them breaks, the whole structure can collapse. The pandemic has already shown us how a disruption in the supply of masks or chips can cause chaos, and rare earth metals are a much more important thread. This situation forces us to think about the future, about what true national security means in the 21st century. It's not just tanks and missiles, but also control over critical resources and technologies. It's the ability to produce the most important things at home. And perhaps this hypothetical crisis, as terrifying as it may seem, will ultimately benefit the world. It will force us to be more innovative, more resourceful, teach us to recycle what we throw away, and create a more resilient and diversified global economy. So what do you think? Is this dependence on a single country the greatest threat of our time? Or do you believe the global market will sort everything out and nothing terrible will happen? Write your opinion in the comments. It would be fascinating to read. What gadget or technology would you be most sorry to lose in such a crisis? If you enjoyed this deep dive into hypothetical scenarios, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We love asking "what if?" and digging deep to get to the heart of the issues that will define our future. Click the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. And, of course, share this video with your friends. Let them also think about the complex and fragile chain that lies behind the simple swipe of a finger across their smartphone screen. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.